Hello, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you join us for today's Lead Accelerator customer webinar on how to develop a killer content strategy. Presenting today is Lead Accelerator expert, Sanjay Melwani. First, before we get started, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. We invite you to ask Sanjay any questions you might have using the Q&A box, and we'll take time to answer those questions during the Q&A portion following Sanjay's presentation. And in case you want to review this webinar after, we will be sending a recording of the webinar along with the slides to you via email following the event. Okay, now without further ado, I will toss things to you, Sanjay.
Okay, thanks for joining everyone. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you all today. So what are we going to talk about? Well, the topic of content is really a big one. But for today's webinar, our goal is to focus less on content development and really more on successfully leveraging the content that you guys currently have within the Lead Accelerator product. So more specifically, we'll cover off on how to perform a content audit to determine the ideal content offers for your nurture streams, how to segment your target audiences and identify the right content for both your known and anonymous contacts, right? Because that can be a little bit different. We'll also touch briefly on how to optimize content across all ad formats in Lead Accelerator. And then we'll look at a few examples of high-performing content and discuss, how we measure high-performing content, how we measure performance. And then we'll wrap up with Q&A. So kicking off your content approach with Lead Accelerator. This section really focuses on your content audit. Now, sourcing content for Lead Accelerator can be a little daunting, but it's important to remember that there is such a wide range of content types that you can use in Lead Accelerator. Here's an example of several content types that you can use to be successful with Lead Accelerator. Remember that different content types serve different purposes. And so when deciding on what you'll use in the Lead Accelerator product, it's important to consider what your ultimate goal is going to be for the program, right? It's also important to consider where in the funnel your prospects are. I'm going to dig into both those topics a little more in a minute here, but for now, one thing to always keep top of mind when making content decisions is that things that can be classified as thought leadership pieces tend to really play very well in Lead Accelerator. For example, your ebooks, your guides, your analyst reports, things, in the left side of the column here. Okay, so how many pieces of content do you need? So here's a question that comes up almost every time I help a client put a strategy in place. How many pieces of content do I need? To answer this question, I think it's important to recognize that what makes Lead Accelerator so powerful is not only the ability to place relevant messaging in front of your target audience, but also the ability to sequence different offers or different content pieces, right, in front of that target audience. So basically, if you're not using multiple pieces of content, then you're not really getting as much value out of the Lead Accelerator product as you potentially could. So what's the magic number? Well, there isn't really an exact number, but at a minimum, ideally you're going to want 4 to 5 pieces of content, right? And here's how I arrived at that number, and you can use this methodology to arrive at your own personal number. Ideally, when I put a strategy in place, I like to think about this in phases, right? And in phase 1, you'll want to start with about 3 nurture streams. Basically, that means creating 3 target audiences. And these 3 target audiences, theoretically, will capture as much site traffic as possible. Now, as an example, you could have a homepage bouncer nurture stream. You could have an engaged anonymous nurture stream, and your third nurture stream could be, say, a product-specific nurture stream, right? And for each of these 3 nurture streams, you're ideally going to want to sequence 3 to 4 offers in the form of 3 to 4 waves. For most Lead Accelerator clients, the goal is to keep their prospects in a nurture stream for, say, at least a month, and if possible, You'll display each offer in front of an audience for 7 to 10 days, right? So if you have 4 offers, then each one can be shown for about a week. You'll end up with 7 to 8 day waves. If you had 3 offers in each nurture stream, then you could display each piece of content in front of your audience for, say, 10 days at a time, right? Now, I know what you're thinking. 3 nurture streams and 4 offers for each nurture stream, that's 12 different offers. That's 12 different content pieces. That's way more than I have, right? But not to worry, because you can most definitely repurpose your offers. I actually encourage you to do so. Most Lead Accelerator customers don't have 12 pieces of content, right? They also don't have the creative resources to build the creative assets for all that content. So here's an important tip that I've seen a lot of clients have success with. You want to try to at least have very relevant content for the first wave in each one of your nurture streams, right? After that, you can put offers in waves 2, 3, and 4 that have historically proven to be popular with your target audience. So, if, for example, you have a product-specific nurture stream, ideally wave 1 of that stream is going to be a piece of content that speaks to that product, and then you can go from there. Okay, so content and segmentation going hand in hand. The slide above here gives you some popular strategies that Lead Accelerator users have taken for their segmentation, right? And the question here is basically, should we create our target segments first and then try and match content to them, or should I list out my content and then try and determine segmentation that's relevant to that content? And really there's no wrong answer here, but as you devise a strategy, it's going to be important to consider a number of different factors, right, when trying to map content to your audience, or vice versa. One thing to think about is, how is my site laid out, right? You also want to think, do I have enough relevant content for the audiences that I'd like to target? And also, are there content pieces that I'm specifically interested in promoting at this point in time, right? So the first question, how's my site laid out, right? This can be a really great way to define your segmentation. For example, my site may be designed in a way that allows me to segment audiences by visitors interested in product A versus product B. Or it's designed to segment audiences by industry, for example, right? This could be a really effective way to target my audience segments. But if I don't have content that speaks to these specific audiences by industry or by product, or maybe my site is not really designed that way, then you might not want to take that approach, right? At LinkedIn, for example, we've actually had a lot of success with taking a product approach. We bucket people based on their interest in specific products like Lead Accelerator, email or sponsored updates, right? And this works for us because we have content that speaks to those specific products. The other question I asked a little bit earlier was, do I have enough relevant content, right? If you're working with a relatively small amount of content, your level of segmentation may be constrained by this, right? And it's going to make more sense to map content to segments. For example, if I'm going to put the same sequence of white papers and case studies in front of 2 different segments, then you might not actually need 2 segments, right? It may make more sense to combine those 2 target audiences. It makes your life a little more simple. And the last question here was, are there content pieces that I'm specifically interested in promoting at this point in time? So, for example, do you have a conference or a webinar that you'd like to promote in the upcoming future? This might help define the content that you're going to put into your nurture streams. Most times, you're going to do a combination of a couple of these things, right? You'll use method 1 or method 2 here, and then combine that with method 3, but more on stage in the buyer's journey on the next slide. Okay, so content based on different stages of the funnel, right? And this is really another thing to think about when we're trying to match our content to our audiences, right? It's thinking about where these prospects lie in the funnel. And with Lead Accelerator, we tend to sort of determine this a little bit differently, right? With anonymous contact nurturing, with our site visitors, we're really determining funnel stage through site activity. So, for example, if a visitor hits your homepage and bounces. We're going to consider these prospects top of funnel. If they hit your pricing page, we can consider these prospects to be more mid or bottom funnel. And the content that we put in front of them can be a little bit more technical, a little bit more specific. So here on this slide are some real world examples, right? Here's some of the content that LinkedIn uses at different stages of the funnel. So the one at the top here, this leaderboard, the Sophisticated Marketer's Guide to LinkedIn, right? A really good example of high-level content, a homepage bouncer piece of content, right? It's brand focused, it's educational, it's not very specific, not product specific anyway. The one here, this leaderboard towards the right, the darker leaderboard here, the crash course to full funnel marketing, the Sophisticated Marketer's Crash Course to full funnel marketing, right? That's a really good example of a piece of content that you could put in front of an engaged anonymous audience, right? Somebody who has gotten a little bit further than your homepage. They visited your pricing page, your blog, your resources page. It's a little bit more focused, but still fairly open, right? Not talking about LinkedIn from a bird's eye view, but we're talking about LinkedIn's suite of products. Moving down, right, winning affluent millennials. This is a really good example of industry specific, right? And in this case, the finance industry. It's important to remember that with the Lead Accelerator product, we have the ability to layer business demographic targeting on top of your audiences. So, you know, a really good example of that here. The Lead Accelerator offer, where's that one? Okay, cool, bottom left here, right? This is a really good example of a product-specific approach to content. And then lastly, bottom of funnel content, right? The Try Today offer on the very right here. A little bit about content strategies for known contacts versus anonymous contacts, right? If you're using our integration with Marketo or Eloqua to target known contacts, you might decide to put more, call it shareable content pieces, right, in front of these folks. For example, your videos, your infographics, or maybe your blog posts, right? And keep in mind that these content pieces are traditionally ungated. And so depending on your strategy, you might be okay with this, right? Because you already have these contacts' email addresses. They're known contacts in your marketing automation database. Your goal here might just be to try and increase the lead score of these contacts in your marketing automation database, right? So that they reach a score that classifies them as, say, marketing qualified or sales qualified. Okay, so we just talked about ungated content for known contacts. What about, is it okay to put ungated content in front of your anonymous site visitors? Well, yes and no, right? Here you need to think about what initiatives are most important to you at this point in time, right? Is it all about leads? I mean, this is Lead Accelerator after all, and if that's the case and you're really focused on running an efficient lead gen campaign with a competitive CPL and a low sort of impressions per action metric, then you're going to want to offer up gated content only, right? Are you willing to measure engagement? Do you value this engagement, right? These are all sort of things to consider when deciding, you know, gated versus ungated. Okay, a little bit about optimizing ad copy based on channel. And, you know, this is really a larger topic that could be its own webinar, and we're going to go off on a bit of a tangent here because I'm going to discuss really creative best practices for promoting content. But a couple of tips here, right? Keep your LinkedIn and Facebook images exactly that, images, right? You have a ton of room to say everything you need to say in the text boxes above and below the ads, including room for text for your call to action. Second, don't forget the call to action. That's just so important. Okay, if you don't have the creative resources to create animated banners, that's okay, right? When it comes to banners, static ads are just fine. I'm seeing more and more of these with more and more LLA customers, right? Firstly, this is less of a branding play, right? Because these site visitors, these prospects are already familiar with you. You really also want to convey a specific message about the offer you're promoting, and really not much more than that. So one frame can really be sufficient here. And lastly, just make sure that the offer being promoted aligns with the landing page, right? You really want this journey to be cohesive, and ideally you should have a synopsis of the offer that the prospect is going to download on that landing page, right? Lastly, and I'll talk about this a little more, but always test your ad copy, right? And more on this in a bit, but especially with social, right? We've noticed that slight tweaks in ad copy can really yield higher engagement, higher conversions. So testing is encouraged. Okay, measuring success with content in Lead Accelerator. Here are some examples of high-performing content, right? And high-performing content can really mean different things to different people. For some Lead Accelerator users, high-performing means a piece of content that generates a high volume of leads, and subsequently, a low cost per lead. Other Lead Accelerator clients would define high-performing content as an offer that generates high-quality leads. So whatever your goal is, I think it's worth reiterating that performance is going to come from putting a relevant offer in front of your audience that really has a level of technicality that's in line with their engagement, right? So a complicated white paper in front of a homepage bouncer, probably not the best idea. I've shown you a lot of LinkedIn creative throughout this presentation, so I thought we'd sort of take a step back from that and look at one of our case study clients, Workfront, right? Here are some examples of content that's worked for them. This is actually one of their 3-week-long nurture streams. Here they're targeting IT professionals visiting one of their high-value solutions pages, right? In this example, Workfront's really defined their audience based on visits to a high-value solutions page, and then they've been successful, presenting the following offers: their free trial offers, their Get the Guide offers, and their ebook offers. Okay, optimization basics, performance metrics based on content type, right? So you'll notice that different pieces of content are going to perform differently. And your goal should really be to put your best performing piece of content, obviously, as long as it's relevant to the target audience, but to put your best performing piece of content in wave 1. Well, what if I don't know, what my best performing piece of content is? Well, the Lead Accelerator dashboard is going to allow you to track all your high-level metrics, right? And really, depending on your goals, those metrics are going to be different, right? If you're looking at engagement, you're going to look at things like clicks and click-through rates. If you're more lead gen focused, you're going to be looking at things like impressions per action, post-click actions, cost per lead. So it's going to be a little bit different based on what you're trying to do, but you can really drill down and look at these metrics by wave. And in Lead Accelerator, each wave is going to correspond to an offer. So by looking at things by wave, you're really looking at offer performance, right? And if you really want to dig into the metrics, right, you'll probably find that certain pieces of content perform better than others on certain channels, right? And the dashboard is going to basically show you performance at this level as well, right? You can drill all the way down to the creative asset and see all types of metrics for how the creative itself, the Facebook versus the LinkedIn sponsored update versus the banner ad is performing. And then another thing to keep in mind is all this data, right, is exportable out of the dashboard into an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, a few more tips to a killer content strategy, right? Let's talk a little bit about wave order based on content type, right? So here's an example of an approach that you can take to define wave order. It's a strategy that I've actually seen a lot of Lead Accelerator users take. Wave 1, right, we've talked about this before. Wave 1 is your best performing, most relevant offer, right? And if you're after leads, put your best lead gen offer here. waves 2 and 3, other relevant offers for this target audience. And your last wave, call it wave 4, in this slide, right, it's wave 6, but your last wave, you can put the offer that you value the highest, right? So I've seen some Lead Accelerator users put a free trial, for example. Here we've got a contact us form, but I've seen a lot of Lead Accelerator users put a free trial at the end of every nurture stream, right? This is a really tough offer, contact us offer, also a really tough offer, and it's usually going to result in limited, albeit, high value signups, but a prospect's going to fall out of the nurture stream anyway, so why not take one last shot at getting them to convert here? And because we're able to move prospects based on conversions, one strategy you can take is really to push the prospect to the last offer, to the last wave in a nurture stream sequence, if they download a white paper or a guide or anything else along sort of that, path of waves leading to that last offer. Okay, so test. As a marketer, it's becoming harder and harder to influence purchase decisions, right? People are making it through 90% of the buyer's journey before they reach out directly. And content is playing such a huge role in the decision maker's journey. On average, they say people are consuming 10 pieces of content before making a decision. So what that should really tell you is to not be afraid to throw multiple pieces of content into your nurture stream mix, right? Try and use lots of content. Lead Accelerator really gives you the opportunity to cycle multiple content pieces in front of your defined audiences. If they don't work, that's okay, right? You can turn off any wave with the push of a button, and you can replace that offer with something else. Okay, a little bit about something that we see often, right? Content limitations based on creative resources. We talked a little bit earlier about the number of content pieces you'll ideally need to be successful with Lead Accelerator, and we said that was sort of 4 to 5 pieces of content, right? Now, one problem that a lot of clients run into really has less to do with the shortage of content, but really more to do with developing the creative assets for that content, right? So a couple of things to keep in mind here, right? It's important that you have a full set of creative, right? That means 4 banner ads for your sort of web-based delivery, 1 Facebook newsfeed ad, and then 1 LinkedIn sponsored update. And here's an example in this slide of all the pieces that you're gonna need, right? Notice that all the creative pieces are promoting the same offer, right? Well, why is this important? Well, basically, your impression delivery is going to be contingent on whether or not you can reach prospects across all the different inventory sources, right? Across all the different channels. If you don't have a newsfeed ad in your mix, for example, and we find one of your warm prospects on Facebook, like we miss out on the opportunity to retarget that prospect, right? But if you want to get up and running quickly, then one approach you can take is to just sort of run newsfeed and sponsored update ads on waves 2, 3, and 4, right? These 2 social channels have proven to be really efficient lead drivers through Lead Accelerator. And starting with these 2 allows you to easily target 2 out of the 3 available channels, right? Well, maybe not easily, but easier than getting banners up and running, right? So remember that with newsfeed and sponsored update ads, you're actually creating the ad in the Lead Accelerator product, right? So you just need to upload 1 static image, and then the ad copy is typed in above and below the image right in the setup process, right? So apart from sourcing the image, it doesn't really require any additional creative resources. And lastly, don't forget about the ad modification services that come along with Launchpad, right? We're not a creative agency here, but we can help you with resizing, with text edits, call to action changes, things like that for up to 5 creative sets, right? That actually equates to 30 pieces of creative. Okay, what else? So, content best practices, sort of wrapping up here. Remember that content comes in many forms, right? And you don't need a ton of creative to get started. If your content is limited, use it to drive your segmentation and not the other way around. But always be thinking about aligning your content with audience engagement, right? That's going to be really important. Remember that content can be gated or ungated. You really want to optimize your ad copy based on channel, right? Whether it's Facebook Newsfeed, LinkedIn sponsored updates, or banner ads out on the web. Use wave order to your advantage, right? It's okay to put some of those high value sort of offers towards the end of your nurture stream. And, you know, lastly, lean on your social channels. They can be really very efficient. Okay, a few final thoughts. And you'll notice if you attended last month's webinar that these are very similar, right? But very relevant to Lead Accelerator. Start simple, right? It's so easy, and it's really one of the valuable things about Lead Accelerator is that you can get complex, you can get into the weeds pretty quickly, but start simple and then go from there. It really allows you to sort of optimize, really look at the metrics, really understand what's performing and what's not as you sort of build out your program. Leverage new content, right? Don't be afraid to put new content into your nurture streams. Try out new content. You're constantly creating content. Don't be afraid to use it in the Lead Accelerator program. Test and optimize, right? Always be testing. You know, test ad copy, test call to action, test different content pieces. This is really a living program, and it needs some love every once in a while. And then give your program time, right? So your program does need some time to ramp up. So before making any big adjustments, you know, give it a couple weeks before, you know, you make any big decisions, see what the numbers look like, and then go from there. Okay. With that, you know, here are some helpful links that are going to come to you in this webinar deck. You know, a little bit more, you know, these are all in our help center, actually. So developing an audience and content strategy, offers that align well with homepage bouncers and how to nurture homepage bouncers, offers that align well for people visiting your product pages, your landing pages, your blog, and how you can nurture known contacts. And then, you know, down here, other resources, we've got the Sophisticated Marketer's Guide to Thought Leadership. Cass, I'm going to throw it back to you. That's all I've got.
All right, so we can start with questions. And I have a question. I'm going to take off my moderator cap and ask a question because I'm also a Lead Accelerator user. You talk about a little bit about where you should put your contact us offers or your free trial offers in the waves. Explain to me a little bit why it's the best practice to put it at the bottom of the waves, because I've heard some thought processes and maybe you should put it at the top because they're you know, most recently engaged with your website.
Sure. So, you know, your contact us offers, your demos, your free trials, tougher offers like that. It's not that you can't put them in wave one, right? That's your ultimate sort of download. I understand that, but you really sort of need to go back and think about what your main objective is. And I think for a lot of our Lead Accelerator customers, the main objective is to generate leads, right? It's generate quality leads, but generate leads. And recency is gonna play a factor in the amount of leads that you're going to generate, right? Somebody who visited your site yesterday is so much more likely to download an asset to convert than somebody who visited your site, say, a couple weeks ago. So if I put a really tough free trial offer on wave one in a nurture stream, what that basically means is that I'm going to get less leads, right? It is a tougher offer, and for those 7 days, I'm going to put that free trial offer in front of them before I move them to wave two, where maybe this is my best offer, my highest sort of lead gen offer. And so depending on your objectives, you know, and I found that most people, you know, who want to generate leads and they want to generate quality leads, and yeah, the free trial is great, but, you know, understanding that quality leads are maybe more important at this point in time, you're better off sort of starting with an offer like that, a white paper, an ebook, a guide, sort of in your initial waves, and then moving people down once they've sort of engaged with your content. You know, you can push them to that last wave, put a free trial offer in front of them.
Awesome, thank you. Let me look at some other questions here.
Okay, so here's another question that just came in on the screen, stream here. So it says, my concern was once we reach a prospect, how do the various pieces of content help in the nurture stream? So if by reach a prospect, you mean once you get a prospect to sort of convert, maybe download a white paper or an ebook, what you really kind of want to think about is, you know, a B2B buyer's journey is a lot longer than a B2C buyer journey, right? And you really want to sort of keep people in nurture for a long period of time. So, you know, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but a lot of our customers are basically saying, all right, if somebody downloads a white paper, that's not really enough, right? Their lead score, for example, isn't high enough for me to consider this person a marketing qualified lead or a sales qualified lead. I don't want to send them straight to sales, right? But what I can do is say, okay, if somebody downloads a white paper, I'm going to move them out of the nurture stream that they're in and put them in, say, a converter's nurture stream, right? And basically the offers that I put in front of this new audience, which is really an aggregate of everybody that sort of downloaded content, hit any of my thank you page URLs, you know, you're allowed to then maybe put more bottom of funnel, more technical content in front of those audiences.
Awesome. Let me see if there's any other questions. All right, well, I think that is all the questions we have today. So thank you, Sanjay, so much for a great presentation. And like we stated earlier, we will be sending a recording as well as the slides to you via email, so keep an eye out for that. And thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.